What if the most powerful man you know was also the one responsible for destroying your life? Clara Martins had everything to give up. Pregnant, alone and on the verge of eviction, she was confronted by the cold and calculating Gabriel Thompson. But what no one imagined was that this meeting would completely change their lives. What happens when the power of pride clashes with the power of compassion? Get ready for a story of twists, secrets and choices that transform the impossible into hope. Are you ready to discover how one decision can change everything? Gabriel Thompson pushed open the door of the small apartment with the confidence of someone used to commanding. Her impeccably shined shoes echoed across the worn floor, catching the attention of the woman who until then had been organizing a pile of clothes in silence. Madame Martins, I believe the reason for my visit is no surprise. His voice was firm, almost cutting. Clara Martins looked up, clutching a blouse to her chest as if it were a shield. I imagined, but not like this, with so many men. She pointed to the two eviction agents who carried documents and looked indifferent. Let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be, Gabriel continued, ignoring her tone. 3 months of rent arrears is a more than generous amount of time. Generous? Clara gave a bitter laugh. It would be generous to understand what it means to have nowhere to go. Gabriel remained impassive, but there was something in Clara's tone that made him hesitate for a moment. He looked around the small apartment. Plain furniture, walls that needed new paint and a shelf full of worn-out books. This was far from the luxury he knew. You had time to resolve this, he said, crossing his arms. But he didn't. My hands are tied. And mine too. Clara took a step forward, forcing Gabriel to face her directly. You don't know what it means to try to keep your head above water when the whole world seems to want to drown you. The eviction agents began moving the few pieces of furniture in the room. Gabriel observed the scene with apparent coldness, but inside, something was beginning to bother him. When Clara let go of the blouse she was holding, he finally noticed. You're pregnant. The statement came out more as a whisper, but it was enough to make the eviction agents pause for a moment. Clara placed her hand on her stomach, as if trying to protect the secret that she could no longer hide. Yes, she said firmly. I'm pregnant. And I'm being evicted. Gabriel blinked a few times, trying to process the information. He didn't know what to say, something unusual for someone used to always having the last word. This doesn't change anything. He tried to regain control. The debts continue. Then go ahead, Mr. Thompson. Take the roof off my head. Leave me pregnant with nowhere to go. Clara's voice wasn't loud, but each word carried a strength that made Gabriel feel the weight of his actions. He looked at the eviction agents, then at Clara. Doubt was growing inside him like a storm. Finally, he sighed deeply. Leave the furniture where it is. His order was quick and decisive, taking everyone by surprise. Sir? One of the agents questioned. You heard. Get out. Now. The men hesitated, but obeyed. When they were alone, Clara crossed her arms, looking at Gabriel suspiciously. And now? Now, you come with me. I can't leave you here like this. Clara stood still for a moment, evaluating his words. There was no gratitude on his face, only caution. And why should I trust the man who dumped me? Gabriel took a deep breath, as if trying to find the right answer. Because maybe, just maybe, I made a mistake. He turned, gesturing for her to follow him. After a moment of hesitation, Clara picked up a bag with some clothes and walked towards the door, without taking her eyes off Gabriel. That's not a favor, Mr. Thompson, and I will never forget what happened here. Gabriel nodded silently as they walked out the door together. Clara's arrival at Villa Esperanza was marked by a tense silence. Gabriel parked the car in front of the imposing mansion, whose white pillars contrasted with the grey sky of that early afternoon. Clara got out of the vehicle with hesitant steps, holding tightly to the strap of her bag, while her eyes roamed the grandeur of the place. "Welcome to Villa Esperanza," said Gabriel, opening the main door. She didn't respond. He just walked in, taking in the details of the mansion, the impeccable marble, the chandeliers that looked like relics from another era, and the light aroma of polished wood. Before Gabriel could say anything else, a voice echoed down the hall. "Who is she?" Lionel Thompson, Gabriel's grandfather, appeared with his wheelchair, moved by one of the employees. His face was marked by lines of severity, and his icy eyes rested on Clara like a judge evaluating a defendant. "Lionel, this is Clara Martins. She'll be here for a while," Gabriel replied with practiced neutrality. "Here?" Lionel laughed, a dry, suspicious sound. "Since when did we turn this house into a shelter?" Clara took a step forward, interrupting Lionel's mocking gaze. "Mr. Thompson, I didn't ask to be here. If you prefer, I can leave right now." Gabriel raised a hand to stop the exchange. "Clara is pregnant, and before you say anything, Lionel, I've already made my decision." Lionel narrowed his eyes, alternating his gaze between Clara and Gabriel. "Pregnant, huh? Well, that explains the rush, but don't tell me you believe this story so easily." "And truth." Clara looked at Lionel without looking away. "And honestly, I don't care what you believe." Lionel leaned forward slightly in his chair, surprise visible on his face. Few people dared to face him in this way. "You've got courage, girl, but that doesn't mean you've earned my respect." He turned the chair and started to walk away. "Let's see how long your stay here lasts." When Lionel disappeared down the hall, Clara let out a breath she didn't even realize she was holding. Gabriel looked at her with a mixture of admiration and discomfort. "I didn't need to talk to him like that. I don't have time to flatter anyone, Mr. Thompson," replied Clara. "Neither do you." Gabriel shook his head, signaling for her to follow him. He led her upstairs to a guest room. "This is where you will stay. If you need something, talk to the employees." Clara looked around the room. It was bigger than the entire apartment I lived in before. The bed seemed too comfortable for someone who had slept on a thin mattress for months. "Thank you," she said finally. "You don't need to thank me. Just rest." He left the room, leaving Clara alone. She sat on the bed, running her hand over her stomach and thinking about how much her life had changed in just a few hours. Downstairs, Lionel watched Gabriel from afar. When the grandson approached, he spoke in a low, controlled tone. "Don't you think you're making a mistake?" "I've already made my decision." Lionel snorted but didn't insist. He knew Gabriel wouldn't back down so easily. Later at dinner, Clara came downstairs hesitantly. At the table, Lionel took his usual place, while Gabriel seemed distracted by an untouched plate. Clara sat on the other side, feeling the heavy gazes on her. "So, Miss Martins, what brought you here besides pregnancy?" Lionel asked, with a tone that bordered on sarcasm. Clara held his gaze with the same firmness she had shown before. "Circumstances, and a promise that was made to me today." "Promises are no guarantee of anything in this house," Lionel replied. "Maybe not, but I keep mine." Clara's answer made Gabriel look up from his plate, intrigued. Lionel just laughed softly, as if enjoying the confrontation. After dinner, Clara returned to her room, exhausted by the day's tensions. As I turned off the lights, I couldn't help but think about Lionel's words and the weight he seemed to carry since he stepped foot in that mansion. In the library, Lionel and Gabriel were arguing in low voices. "She doesn't belong here, Gabriel. You are playing with fire." "Maybe," Gabriel admitted, "but I'm not going back." Lionel shook his head, frustrated, but he knew Gabriel's decision had been made. Clara woke up early the next morning, unable to ignore the rays of sunlight that passed through the silk curtains of the luxurious bedroom. He spent a few minutes watching the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened. His new reality still seemed like a distant dream. As I walked down the stairs, the aroma of fresh coffee filled the air. She hesitated as she crossed the main hall, but decided to explore her surroundings to avoid Lionel and Gabrielle, both of whom were difficult to look at. Outside, the vast gardens of Villa Esperanza stretched out like a movie set. But something caught his attention. In the far corner, there was an abandoned area, where wild bushes and withered flowers seemed to compete for the last breath of life. Clara approached, fascinated. Among the neglected plants, he found a solitary rose bush. Its thin branches and dry leaves told the story of something that had long been forgotten. "You look as out of place as I do." Clara sighed, delicately touching the dried petals. "Don't waste your time." Lionel's sharp voice echoed behind her. He watched her from his wheelchair, hands folded in his lap. Clara turned to face him, not hiding the irritation in her eyes. "Why not?" "Because nothing can bring it back. It's dead." Like many things in this world, sometimes the best thing we can do is let them go. Clara raised her chin, challenging him. "What if I'm wrong? What if you just need care?" Lionel narrowed his eyes, intrigued by her determination. "If you believe that, good luck, but don't expect the world to be kind to you." She didn't respond. He knelt down next to the rose bush and began to clean up the broken branches and hardened earth, ignoring Lionel's comments. In the following days, Clara returned to the garden every morning. I watered the rose garden, removed the weeds, and carefully moved the soil around the plant. His hands got dirty, but there was something therapeutic about the routine. Gabriel noticed her absence from the house and found her one afternoon, kneeling in the garden, with the sun shining on her face. He approached her in silence, watching her for a few moments before speaking. "Clara." She looked up, wiping her hands on her pants. "Yes? What are you doing?" "Taking care of it," he replied, indicating the rose garden. Gabriel frowned, not understanding. "Doesn't look very promising." "Yeah, but promises are not guarantees. Isn't that what they say in this house?" She replied with a slight ironic smile. Gabriel smirked but remained silent for a moment. "My grandfather saw you here the other day." "And, of course, he complained," replied Clara, returning to work. To be fair, he was more curious than irritated. Clara stopped for a moment and looked at Gabriel. "Why are you telling me this?" He shrugged. "Because perhaps you have more impact on this house than you realize." Before she could respond, they heard a noise coming from the porch. Gabriel quickly turned around and saw Lionel, who looked paler than usual. He was trying to move the wheelchair, but something was wrong. "Lionel!" Gabriel shouted, running towards him. Clara instinctively followed behind. When they reached the porch, Lionel was leaning forward, breathing heavily. "It's my heart," murmured Lionel, while Gabriel tried to remain calm. Clara acted quickly, kneeling next to the chair. "Unbutton your shirt," he told Gabriel, with authority. "What?" "Trust in me." She opened Lionel's collar and checked his pulse. "Breathe slowly, Mr. Thompson. Inhale through your nose. Exhale through your mouth." Lionel tried to follow instructions, but the effort seemed almost unbearable. Gabriel called an ambulance, while Clara kept her grandfather stable, speaking to him in a firm, reassuring tone. "Stay with me, Mr. Thompson. Are you listening? Don't close your eyes." When the ambulance arrived, the paramedics praised Clara for her quick actions. Lionel was taken to the hospital, and Gabriel remained by her side, silent. "Where did you learn that?" he asked, as they watched the ambulance leave. "My father was a paramedic. He taught me the basics." Gabriel nodded, impressed. "You saved his life." Clara sighed, looking at her hands still covered in dirt. Maybe now he realizes that some things are not as beyond saving as he thinks. Gabriel smiled slightly, but Clara knew that that moment would only be the beginning of something more complex. The hospital was silent when Gabriel and Clara left Lionel under medical care. The tension of the morning still hung in the air, but Clara didn't have time to digest what had happened. As soon as they arrived at Villa Esperanza, the sound of footsteps echoed at the entrance. Clara. The voice was unmistakable. She froze when she saw Lucas Vieira standing in the middle of the lobby. Her ex-partner stared at her with a smile full of sarcasm. He was dressed casually, but his eyes carried a dangerous gleam. "What are you doing here?" Clara asked, feeling her chest tighten. "I came to get what's mine." He took a step towards him, ignoring Gabriel's presence. "You lost that right when you left me," Clara replied firmly, but with rapid breathing. Gabriel positioned himself next to her, his face serious. "Who is this man?" "I'm her baby's father," Lucas replied before Clara could say anything. "And I think that gives me the right to be here, doesn't it?" "Father?" Gabriel arched an eyebrow, crossing his arms. "Are you just showing up now?" Lucas smiled, adjusting his collar. "It's none of your business, Thompson. What happens between Clara and me has nothing to do with you." Clara took a step forward, her face etched with anger. "You have nothing to do with this baby, not even with me." "And even?" Lucas gave a harsh laugh. "Look, Clara, I didn't come here to fight. I just want to make sure my son isn't raised by someone else." Gabriel couldn't contain the threat in his voice. "If you really cared, you would have shown up sooner. But from what I see, he's just here to create trouble." Lucas narrowed his eyes, approaching Gabriel. "And who are you exactly? The savior, the hero?" "I'm someone who won't let you disturb her," Gabriel replied firmly. Clara intervened before the situation escalated. "He arrives." "Lucas, you never worried about me, much less this baby. You're here because you want something, not because you care." Lucas gave a bitter smile. "Perhaps. Maybe I just want to make sure you and the baby are close to those who can offer the best. Like this house, for example." "Ah, now I understand." Gabriel laughed, but without humor. "You're here because you think you can take advantage." Lucas shrugged without denying it. Clara felt anger rising within her. "Enough, Lucas. I will not allow you to manipulate anyone else. Go away." Lucas hesitated, but before he could respond, another voice echoed through the lobby. "Who is this man?" Lionel appeared in a wheelchair, pushed by one of the employees. Lucas stared at the old man, quickly assessing who he was. "I'm Lucas Vieira, her baby's father." Lionel crossed his arms, looking from Lucas to Clara. "And what exactly are you doing here, Mr. Vieira?" Lucas tried to maintain his confident pose. "Just wanting to secure my place in my son's life." Lionel chuckled softly, but there was a hint of menace in his voice. "Place? Boy, you have no place here. This house is not for opportunists." "With all due respect, sir, this is not something you can decide," Lucas replied, trying to maintain his composure. Lionel narrowed his eyes, his authority radiating into the room. "Maybe not, but I can guarantee that as long as Clara is in this house, she will have my support." Lucas backed away slightly, but tried one last shot. "That doesn't change the fact that the baby is mine." Clara finally took the floor. "This baby is mine, not yours, not his. It's mine. You are not part of my life, Lucas, and you will never be part of this child's life." The strength in his voice seemed to disarm Lucas. He looked around, realizing he had no allies there. After a long moment, he took a step back. "Very good. I'm leaving, but this isn't over." He turned and left, slamming the door. The silence that remained was almost deafening. Lionel sighed, looking at Clara. "You were brave, girl. Maybe even more than I expected." Clara nodded, trying to control her emotions. Gabriel lightly touched her shoulder, speaking in a low voice. "He's not coming back. Not while I'm here." She looked at Gabriel, recognizing the sincerity in his words, and finally felt the weight of tension begin to lift. The night was silent at Villa Esperanza, but the echoes of the confrontation with Lucas still lingered in Clara's mind. However, the last few months had taught her that, even in the midst of chaos, it was possible to find strength within herself. Gabriel remained by her side the entire time, watching for any sign of concern. Meanwhile, Lionel watched everything from a distance, more reflective than ever. The next morning, Clara started to feel contractions. They were mild at first, but quickly intensified. Gabriel was in the library when he heard the muffled scream coming from upstairs. "Clara?" He ran upstairs, finding her leaning on the bed, her face contorted in pain. It's time," she said, breathing raggedly. Without thinking twice, Gabriel carried her in his arms and quickly went down the stairs. Lionel, who was in the living room, noticed the commotion and approached. "What is happening?" "The baby is coming," replied Gabriel, as he crossed the hall with Clara in his arms. Lionel watched with a mixture of concern and pride as Gabriel loaded Clara into the car and drove off towards the hospital. The journey was quick, but every second seemed like an eternity. Clara squeezed Gabriel's hand tightly, breathing deeply as he guided her. "It's going to be okay," he said, over and over again, as if he wanted to convince her and himself at the same time. Upon arriving at the hospital, Clara was immediately taken to the delivery room. Gabriel didn't leave her side, holding her hand and encouraging her with calm words. "You can do it, Clara. You are strong." Hours later, the sound of soft crying filled the room. The doctor smiled, announcing, "It's a boy." Clara, exhausted, smiled as she saw the baby being placed in her arms. Gabriel was at her side, his eyes shining with emotion. "He's perfect," Clara whispered, caressing her son's delicate face. A few hours later, Lionel arrived at the hospital. Despite his tired expression, there was something different about him. When he looked through the glass of the observation room where the newborns were, he saw his great-grandson sleeping peacefully. "He's strong like his mother," commented Lionel, breaking the silence as Gabriel approached. "And I hope there's something from you too, grandfather," replied Gabriel, smiling slightly. Lionel gave a slight nod, his sharp wrinkles softening for a moment. Back in the room, Gabriel entered with the baby in his arms. Clara watched him, moved, as he approached and placed the little one in her arms. "Clara," Gabriel began, his voice low and full of emotion. He took a small velvet box from his pocket and knelt beside the bed. Clara's eyes widened in surprise. "You transformed my life in ways I never imagined. I want to spend all my days by your side, raising our son and building a future together. Clara Martins, will you agree to marry me?" Tears welled up in Clara's eyes as she smiled and nodded. "Yes, Gabriel, I accept." The two hugged, with the baby between them, symbolizing the beginning of a new life. Days later, Villa Esperanza was decorated for the wedding. Friends and family gathered to witness Gabriel and Clara's union. Lionel, now more open, made an unexpected toast during the reception. "I learned that it's never too late to change. That true wealth lies in how we treat those around us. Clara, you brought something to this house that none of us knew we needed. Hope." Applauded by everyone, Gabriel and Clara looked at each other with gratitude. As they held their son, they both knew they had found more than a new family. They had found redemption, love, and a future full of possibilities.